So good morning, everyone. I'm Marina Colato. I'm chair of ETAL, the English Teachers Association of Larissa. On behalf of the board of ETAL, I welcome you all to today's event. Thank you for your response and your support to our association. Today, we have the honor and pleasure to have with us two distinguished pedagogists and researchers in the field of ELT, Dr. Nicos Sifakis and Dr. Kosmas Vlachos. We thank them both for their kindness to accept our invitation to deliver two very interesting speeches to colleagues from all over Greece. We will start with Dr. Sifakis. Nicos Sifakis is professor of teaching English for specific purposes in the Department of Language and Linguistics of the Faculty of English Language and Literature of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Give me a second, please. Sorry. Okay, all right. Sorry for the interruption. Well, he holds a BA in computational linguistics and a PhD in language and linguistics from the University of Essex. From 2003 to 2020, he served as a faculty member of the Hellenic Open University, where he acted as director of the postgraduate program titled Teaching English as a Foreign International Language. His research interests include intercultural communication and pedagogy, teaching and researching English as an international lingua franca, language teaching methodology, distance education, adult education, and teacher education. He is active in research in the areas of intercultural communication and education, English as an international language, teaching methodology, and teacher training. His speech today has the title, Distance Learning for Hard Times, Coping with the Emergency Remote Teaching Reality, an EFL Teacher's Survival Guide. Dr. Sifakis, it is true that for a big number of teachers, distance learning was a totally new experience, a teaching situation they did not know how to cope with. And it definitely generated feelings of insecurity and fear. Even those who saw it as a challenge and tried to deal with it as effectively as possible, even those, they still need to know more. So I'm sure everyone is looking forward to listening to you. The floor is yours. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Colato, for your invitation and the wonderful things that we are hearing today concerning the group of teachers in Larissa and the broader region. Congratulations once again. So let me go to my talk today. As you can see, the talk has to do with the ongoing situation in Greek state, and not only, but mainly state education for the past year, 15, 16 months. I'm just realizing now, as I'm thinking about it, that, well, I know that I've been working with in the distance education mode for a number of years, since 1998. But most of you, most of the teachers, most of the members of the Larissa group of teachers have also finished the Hellenic Open University postgraduate degree in teaching English as a foreign language, which means that you have already experienced many things that I'm going to be talking about, because what I wanted to focus on and start with is by highlighting the importance of distance education as a valid system of education. And this is something that you've experienced. So I'm going to be talking about that. And I want to start with some basic things, some basic terms that I believe it's really important to clarify before we continue, because over the past 15 months, many of these terms have been used time and again, and we haven't really decided, there's no common agreement on what these terms mean. Essentially, that was largely to be expected because of the urgency of the situation in March last year. But still, we need to distinguish certain things as much as we can so that we know what we are talking about. And I believe what I will be talking about will ring true to most of you who have some experience in distance education as students of the Hellenic Open University. So the first term I'd like to clarify is the term distance education. Now, distance education is a system, an educational system, a valid educational system that offers students, undergraduates and postgraduate students, the opportunity to engage with studying, and it also offers certain advantages. The fact, for example, that you are at a distance, you don't move to a physical space to receive education, means that you can stay at your own place and work and study at your own pace, following your own way of working and engaging with information and organizing your own self-study. Now, that's extremely important because of the idiosyncrasies of this system, the fact that there's a distance between students, the material, and essentially the tutors. We know that in distance education, the most important, the single most important element is the material. And I realize, I would like to stress this, that the material is extremely important and should be developed according to the principles of distance education. So we're talking about specially developed materials. And what is special about these materials? Well, it's the fact that it's the materials that do the teaching, lecturing process. The materials carry the responsibility of teaching. The material teaches. That's the fundamental principle in distance education. This doesn't mean that the tutor is absent. The tutor is there, but the role of the tutor is secondary. And an additional characteristic of distance education is that we choose it. It's a question of choice. This is exactly what those of you who graduated from the Open University did. You chose to become students of the Open University, and therefore you chose to engage with distance education. That's extremely important. So let's remember this. When we're talking about distance education, we're talking about a special system of education with specially developed materials, a more complicated role of the tutor, and with students who are more motivated to engage in this mode of education precisely because they have selected it. Now, at the same time, we're dealing with what we are, what we've been dealing with for the past year. And this has been called, and I quite like this term, emergency remote teaching. That's a very nice way of putting, very crude way of representing exactly what is happening. The idea of emergency, something that nobody was prepared for. Remote instead of distance. Remoteness has the feeling of being separated while you don't want to be separated. It's the remoteness, being on your own, feeling lonely and isolated. And we are essentially talking about teaching. Teaching. We're talking about teaching. We're not talking about anything else. The objective, in other words, in in this past few months has been, or the focus has been primarily on teaching, on developing teaching practices. There's been very little, if anything, on the learning impact of this emergency remote situation. So the characteristic of emergency remote teaching is that it is, of course, a mode of distance education. It is large scale and it is compulsory. You don't choose it. Choice, as we've seen, is very important. In this case, we were not offered a choice because of the pandemic, so we were forced to engage with it. This makes a big difference, as we know. It incorporates alternative and unplanned methods for delivering instruction. Alternative in the sense that we've been, for all these years, we've been used to teaching face-to-face. So this is another way of teaching that we haven't been, we don't know how to do. We weren't trained for it. And this means that the methods for delivering instruction, which is another crude way of referring to teaching, involves largely unplanned methods of doing so, precisely because of lack of training. At the same time, the situation becomes even more complicated, more confusing, because of the fact that suddenly in March 2020, we realized that we have all these different types of platforms that we can engage with, Zoom, Skype, WebEx, and so on. And a lot of materials, most of them online materials, ready-made online materials, as we know, Digital School, Photodendro, all these wonderful materials that have been around for quite some time, but not all teachers knew about them. And suddenly we are aware of their existence. But we don't really have the adequate training that would allow us to use these materials and platforms adequately. So there's a lot of confusion because we were forced to dive into this sea of emergency remote teaching without understanding clearly and thinking about things like what we've talked just before in distance education, the role of the tutor, and so on, which means that everybody was forced to adapt, especially the students, and of course the teachers. And this led to, across the board, to low motivation of students. Another term is teaching. Teaching is linked with what we call formal educational settings, schooling, essentially. So what is this teaching? Teaching is a systematic development. So there's a system and implementation of a set curriculum that we haven't designed ourselves. So we have the curriculum is there. The curriculum develops the different syllabi that put forward the process of exposing, that's what teaching does, exposes learners and students to different inputs and activities that engage them in various tasks. And the aim, of course, is at the end result is some form of learning and some form of acquisition. And that's exactly what, when learning comes in, acquiring new knowledge and skills and developing attitudes through different forms of study, through experiencing materials, experiencing communication patterns, or being exposed to these formal teaching procedures. Of course, we learn in many other ways, and there is research that shows that schooling in its traditional formal educational sense is suitable for just one of the many different types or profiles of learners. but not everybody. So schooling and school is not for everybody. The way school is organized is not for everybody. We don't all learn when we go to school. Some of us do, sometimes we learn, but not every time. So with these terminologies, with these terms aside, let me now refer to a number of parameters, 6 parameters, that focus on the social dimension of ERT, emergency remote teaching, in the pandemic era. The first one is the learners. The learners are at the receiving end of what we do. So the first thing to consider is their age. And depending on their age, we have, all this time, we had different experiences, different situations, different realities. So primary school learners behave differently than slightly older learners. The reason is that the younger the learner, the more they have an urgent need for socializing and acquiring a personal identity through their socialization procedures. And of course, this goes on throughout our school life, but it's even more important when we go to school, πρώτη δημοτικού, for example. We remember that, I think this is the next bullet that I'm talking about now. The emergency remote teaching has been extremely taxing and problematic for those students who entered the formal education for the first time in their lives in September last year. So those who went to πρώτη δημοτικού, because they did not have any previous images or experiences from formal education. Those students who are in gymnasio or lykio, they've been around, they've gone to school, they have collected experiences from being a student. So they know what being a student means because they've experienced it. And this was positive for those students, for the older students, the older the better, because they were not in any way, at least immediately, negatively influenced by this. On the contrary, on the other hand, and I'm sure that those of you who work with younger learners have actually, well, you know this, τα πρωτάκια που λέμε, those students who went for the first time at school, in many cases, they were traumatized because they were spending, the previous months of their lives when they were 4 years old, 3, 4, 5 years old, with their families, their parents, grandparents, and everybody telling them, when you go to school, you will meet new friends, you will have the opportunity to, have a life, develop your own personality and so on. So they were looking forward to that. And what happened in the end? Nothing happened. So this, in some cases, in quite many cases actually, resulted in traumas, in this mismatch between expectation and reality. So that's a major issue with learners that we are beginning to see. We're beginning to study and realize now the difference between those being a student, those who actually know they are students, so they can carry the identity of being a student from face-to-face mode to the distance mode, at least for some time, for a few months, and then begin to engage with the difficulties of online education slowly. And we have the major difficulties of those students who didn't have any experience and they need to become students. And this was a major problem because you cannot become a student when you begin this experience from scratch in this emergency mode. When everybody is unprepared and everything is forced upon you, it's a very, very negative context. Access is another thing. Not everybody has the same opportunities, the same access. The platforms are there, but access is not always there. Internet connections, time limitations, computers, laptops, the ability to use these things in a family of two, three, four, or more members. This is problematic, and this means that this is an additional burden on the learners, especially the younger learners, which makes it even less likely for all this experience to lead to good learning opportunities. And also there are other messages that are underlined. For example, typically we tell our kids, don't play with your computer because your eyes will hurt. I grew up with this. I wasn't supposed to watch television for that reason. And but now monitors, are they good or are they bad? Is it a good thing to spend so many hours in front of a monitor? What is the final message? What can we get from this? So we keep sending, or the learners receive conflicting and confusing messages in many different domains. And this leads to stress. This uncertainty leads to increased stress for these learners that differs, of course, from age to age and from person to person, but it's there. And an increased sense of frustration. Where am I? What am I going? What am I doing? How do I know if what I'm doing is correct? And most importantly, what about connecting to my friends or making new friends? And of course, when you are stressful and frustrated, and this keeps going and keeps going, it leads to other things that can even have medical repercussions, like being tired, chronically tired, feeling psychologically isolated. You're on your own, you are with your family, you want to escape. And this leads to being, angry, essentially. And of course, there's also many, as we've said, many different and confusing expectations that are there because of essential misunderstandings regarding the different orientations moving from face-to-face to this emergency situation, the online situation. So that's the learners, the parameter with the learners. If you shift the focus now to the families, the parents and the guardians and so on, we begin to realize that we're dealing with a certain theory about education. What is the role of education? What expectations do we have from education? Why do we go to school? Well, families have certain expectations that are not met. This leads to pressure on the families themselves, that leads to frustration, and this leads to a cancelling out of the entire educational system. If you talk to families, and research shows this, and there have been a number of articles, not just from Greece, but mainly from our country, that this year has led to illiteracy, lack of literacy, illiteracy of an entire generation. So this is what parents, some parents or most families, this is the environment. This has been the environment for the past year. That the entire educational system has failed because of this leap from face-to-face to distance education without any preparation. And we come to the teachers, to us, to you, essentially. Well, I mean, what can I say? I have enormous admiration for each and every single one of you. I was, of course, around when this started, and I was able to follow, because I was talking to my colleagues and friends, coordinators, advisors, and so on, and teachers. And the first thing, of course, that happened was an awareness, a sudden awareness of what is going on. What expectations do we have? What are the responses to these expectations by the system? And of course, essentially lack of training, at least from the point of view of the policy makers. Some teachers claim to have to some extent, lost control of their classroom because of this development. And this is really strange, because what this means, the underlying assumption, is that a teacher needs to control their classroom. And the second underlying assumption is that the teacher is at the center of the classroom, the main character, the controller, the leader of the classroom, which is not entirely correct. But when the situation changes, these hidden assumptions emerge and become really visible, especially due to the lack of training, preparation, and so on and so forth. Of course, the discourse about this loss of control referred to the reasons for this loss of control, whether we can use cameras or not, how can we engage every single student in our class, and so on. And of course, the other question has been, how can we essentially help all students, and especially the weaker students, when we are teaching online, when we don't meet face-to-face with them? The repetitive experience of these issues have led to many cases to teacher burnout, a sense of feeling spent, essentially. Now, what about the policymakers? The policymakers, for example, the Ministry of Education. Now, they perceived, this is my view, I don't know if everybody will agree with this, but this is my own expert view, if you like. The perception of ERT was of something that is an emergency and it will end. So there's no need to deal with it systemically. We don't need to change, fundamentally change, or begin to think about changing all these different modes of education. Most importantly, the materials, for example. The general perspective was from the Ministry of Education was that we can deal with it, it will soon end. It's an emergency. And for this reason, policymakers did not really engage to a large extent, perhaps for many reasons, perhaps for political reasons or for other reasons, I don't know. I'm just reporting what I have personally seen. So there was no engagement with a serious, deep-end systemic adaptations that were necessary. Developing appropriate materials for distance education and providing essential, extensive and ongoing training to every single teacher. So they focused on handling the parameter of time, you know, how much we're going to deal with this, and hoping that all this will soon end. So it was a very basic handling of the situation without getting their hands dirty, as it were. Of course, we cannot expect anything more to happen from an organization whose purpose is not to educate. So the Ministry of Education is not an educational organization. It is an administration, a political organization. So it's a slightly different concern that they are dealing with. But still, we wait from the Minister of Education to make decisions that will make all these things easier for all the other stakeholders. And of course, I think that one of the main priorities from the policymakers was with the technical aspects of this emergency situation. So if you go to the Minister of Education, the online, the web page, you will see extensive information on the different platforms and how to use them. And this is really rich, but it can be quite confusing, and it was confusing. And of course, it was thanks to individual schools, especially at the beginning of this pandemic. It's thanks to individual schools and to the principals and individual teachers who took it upon themselves to self-organize and help one another, not just with the technical aspect, but with every other aspect as well, pedagogical aspect. And we should be really thankful to all these teachers. The subject matter we don't really think about, but it's a major issue and that we should think about, because the subject matter is what we do. This is our job. This is your job as teacher. It is to teach English. How do we do this? We follow the curriculum. Because a good number of teachers are not aware of the curriculum. Those of you, of course, you have graduated from the Open University, so you know what curriculum is. But there's a good number of teachers who don't know. All they know is the textbook. The textbook is there, and they follow the textbook as a curriculum, or better, as a syllabus, as a day-to-day organization of the day-to-day teaching process. And the role of the textbook is central for the subject matter. But what is the objective of teaching English? What is it? It's not really to teach the language, it's to teach communication. And as we teach communication, to expose our learners, our students, to different structures and functions of the language. And for this reason, we have specific pedagogies that prioritize communication, and through that, we can teach the language over time. Now, this we all know about, of course, but if we are textbook centered and the mode of education suddenly changes from a face-to-face mode where the textbook is central to an online mode where the textbook, we have to learn how to deal with the textbook, suddenly the pedagogical element of how do we teach English becomes, emerges as an important subject. What do we do, in other words? How can we teach the textbook? How do we do that? And we don't think about what we should be thinking. How can we engage our learners, even in this online mode, to communicate? And through communication, to learn or begin to learn to engage with the different structures and functions of English. The different perspectives about teaching and learning are another issue. As I've said, the curriculum is always there. The curricula in Greece have always been one step or two steps ahead of the textbooks that were developed to teach the curricula. So in many cases, you see the textbooks being more traditional, if you like. For example, the curriculum, the current curriculum that we have, and the curriculum that we've been having for the past 20 years, prioritizes intercultural communication. We know this. Intercultural communication is essential, one of the essential ingredients of the curriculum when we teach English. Now, if you, I mean, I don't want to point to specific pages, but I'll do that. If you look at the textbook of the first grade and the second grade of junior high school, the first pages of that course book have, and I remember this clearly because I've been working with this particular textbook. You have a photograph of a number of young students, young people, 10, 11 years old. One student is black, the other is with slanted eyes, another one has blonde hair, and so on, girls and boys. And the question is, the task is, can you tell to the students, can you tell where these students in the photographs come from looking at their faces? So you look at the faces and you're supposed to say where they come from. And this is intercultural competence. Now, to me, this is extremely stereotypical because you cannot tell where someone is from by just looking at them. But this is what is taught. So what I'm saying is that we need to become more critically aware, in any case, of the textbooks. But the curriculum talks about these things. So we can add things to the textbooks. And we can do this whether we teach online or face-to-face. And we need to become more flexible about looking at the teaching and learning aims, linking teaching with learning, what the learning impact of our teaching is. That's a major question. Now, I'm not sure, and I mean, I'm going out on a limb, as they say here. I'm not sure that many of our colleagues think about that. We have to be self-critical. How many times do we think about the learning impact of our teaching? Well, with this change, with this sudden change in the emergency remote teaching, suddenly we're talking about these things, and this is a good thing. I've been talking about formal education. Formal education is important. It is the official, structured, and organized educational system that the public organizations and recognized private organizations work with. And so for the average Greek person, the Greek family and the Greek students and the teachers, in Greece, we love formal education. We want to be formally educated. We look at certifications. We want the to charti, because we believe it offers specific qualifications as a result of our training, and this is recognized. Now, with regard now to the reality of emergency remote teaching, suddenly we have an uncertainty regarding this formal educational system. To me, it has completely collapsed, because all these three domains, the curriculum, which is there, textbooks, which are there, and assessment and grading, which are there and a part of your job, suddenly we don't know how to deal with them. How do we deal with the curriculum online? How do we teach the textbook online? How do we assess properly when we are online? How do we provide grades? We don't know. So that's one of the major problems of formal education in this country, that it has been established upon the traditional face-to-face, traditional, let's say, mode of education, instead of looking at the necessities beyond any educational system. if the curricula, the textbooks, and everything else were understandable to teachers, parents, learners, and every other stakeholder, we would have fewer problems because of the change, this sudden change in the mode of teaching. And I'm setting aside the other problems which are major, the socialization problems of the students, for example. So in other words, in this period, distance education, which is perceived as emergency remote teaching, is not and has not been identified as a systemic and legitimate alternative means of formal education. We don't consider it to be appropriate at the same level, at the same par with formal education. And we should think about that, because if distance education is programmed correctly and developed appropriately, it can be an excellent way of formal education, as you know, of course, and as we know from research, because there are across the world, there are schools that work in the distance education way. So instead of looking at distance education in this slide, we have considered it, as you see, as unanticipated, chaotic, very demanding, and deeply disruptive. Despite the temporary character, which is another one of its problems, although there's a growing discourse among colleagues who say that it is here to stay. Despite that, we still consider it temporary. It is better if it is there as an option rather than anything else. Now, very quickly, let me see. Okay, I'm running out of time. What is the pedagogical dimension of distance learning in EFL teaching? Pedagogically, it is possible to see three different levels of engagement. At least this has been my awareness, because I worked with teachers during this period. The first level it involves those teachers who said, well, okay, we can very clearly and simply move from face-to-face to distance without giving it too much thought. We do the same things, no change. Okay, that's the first tier without any serious thought. The second tier involves those teachers who wanted to engage with this new reality, and they struggled. So they started asking questions about distance education. Why do we have it? How does it work? What are the different modes? How do I work in these different modes, online and offline? And more importantly, how does foreign language pedagogy work in this distance education mode? And by pedagogy, we mean the materials, feedback, assessment. The last level of response to this emergency reality is those teachers like you who have struggled. They were flabbergasted with this change, sudden change of style and mode of teaching, but they asked the questions, and they began to develop full awareness and take control of the situation. And this is the questions to ask if you want to have full awareness. What is distance education? What should I know about distance education? What skills should I have when I engage in distance education? How should I think about distance education in terms of attitude? This is extremely important. And then take the subject matter of pedagogy and tailor it to the needs of distance education, without forgetting a very important aspect of foreign language pedagogy, which is educational psychology. And this is a major issue that we can talk about at some other lecture or seminar, because this is something that I think is missing in broadly speaking from education in our country. For example, how do we deal with groups? How do we deal with smaller groups in our unit, our classroom unit? How do we consolidate a positive environment, especially for foreign language education, in order to help our learners attain any kind of learning? They need to feel secure. The environment that we develop as teachers needs to be one of security and acceptance, so that all learners can be integrated. That's another situation, a major issue in education. Now, a valid question here is, how do we do this in an online context? And I don't think that this question has been asked, but many of you are still struggling and won't look forward, try to find ways to achieve this. And this is really amazing. So these are the three tiers. The first one is without too much thought, the average teacher without any reflective capabilities or willingness. The second one, who is the person, the teacher who wants to keep things simple and doesn't really ask any major questions. And of course, the third one is the teacher who is looking for answers. So what do these things mean in practice? What can we learn? How should we respond to this situation? I'm sure you know these things. I'm just going to repeat them. It's important to grow an awareness and reach a maturity of awareness of many things. The first one is, where are you? What are the circumstances in which with which you have to operate? What is the bare minimum that you should do? What other constraints are there? What are the expectations of learners, parents, school masters, and so on? And of course, awareness of the limitations, because the technical aspect has many limitations. And of course, one of the major limitations is put by ourselves as teachers when we don't think about the impact, the learning impact of our lessons. So it's not possible to take the textbook that you use in the face-to-face mode, for example, the example I gave earlier, the intercultural communication, intercultural competence example. It's not possible to take the same example and do the same thing, exactly the same thing, spend exactly the same time with that activity online. This has to change. We need to, sadly, we need to prepare from scratch every single lesson. I'm sure you do this. Questions, since the distance mode has at least these two modes, the online mode and the offline mode, both of them have to be appropriately designed. We don't design these modes in the same way that we design a face-to-face lesson. And what we do during face-to-face meetings, for example, we should lower the number of activities. The number of activities should be smaller when we are online, because it takes more time for people to engage, and it takes more time for us as teachers to monitor what is going on. So time is really, really important. Most importantly, and I'm sure, again, I repeat this, you do this. I'm not breaking new grounds here. We need to engender a positive and supportive environment. Without that, things cannot move forward. Time is very, very important. We should take time to engage in a supportive environment. But this is easy. Imagine if you were teaching mathematics, if you were teaching history or any other geography, physics, any other subject matter, those subject matters have a very heavy syllabus that needs to be taught So it's more difficult for the teacher to find time on top of that to deal with the environment. It's more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. For us, we are language teachers, which means that any opportunity to use language is a learning opportunity. So you can teach English while at the same time, you are engendering this positive and supportive environment. You can do both things at the same time. And of course, engaging every single participant. The curriculum needs to be adapted so that it is learner-centered. This is in the curriculum, but of course, when you teach a textbook doesn't know your individual students' profiles and learning needs. Learner-centeredness and learning-centeredness, how different people, our learners are different as people, what they prefer, what kind of learning they prefer, and the different modes of engaging different people in learning activities. All these things, language use, this can be done through, since we prioritize communication and interaction, we can do our job as language teachers by prompting our students to use language online and offline by asking them, for example, to go to YouTube or any other platform. It's still an opportunity to learn and use the language. And of course, learning by using. All this centers around the same, this notion of teaching English, the ideal is to use the language, because the more you use the language, the better opportunities you have learning it. So if what we need to do is develop and foster a looser, non-formal, or ideally informal educational environment when we teach online. Assessment methodologies need to be adapted in the online mode. So this is something we should do even in the face-to-face mode. We should be working in terms of collecting information from our learners and categorizing it, placing it in their individual portfolios, because that's what provides information for assessment for us, rather than putting a grade. Self-assessment and peer assessment should also be incorporated, especially in the online mode. And of course, the online platforms and applications are absolutely necessary, and we should try to make the best of them. But they are not the main focus. It should not be the main focus. In other words, as you know, because those of you who have graduated from the Hellenic Open University, distance education is a valid and legitimate way of perceiving distance as an advantage. And that's the major attitude we should have towards distance. So when you hear a teacher or a parent criticize distance education, they come from the wrong place. They cannot be open. They're not prepared to be open to the riches that distance education has to offer. And in other words, the way we perceive it in the Hellenic Open University, and those of us who know about distance education, is that distance is an advantage, and we cater for the materials and for the roles that we have in the different ways that we engage with our learners. Distance is not a necessary evil. It is an advantage, because our learners participate through a medium with which they have a degree of familiarity. This is the online platform, the mobile phone. So that's good. It's good. Secondly, you can select topics, especially those of us who are in English language teaching. The topics can be more interesting, more immediately interesting to our learners. And we can select applications with which our learners are already familiar, like the YouTube, for example. It also gives opportunities, if you know what you're doing, for developing appropriate differentiation of learning. For example, dealing with the introverted and the extroverted learners. And distance education does not imply that exclusively and entirely that you engage at a distance. You can have meetings, as we do at the Hellenic University. You can do other things as well. And I believe that the most important thing is to have a positive attitude towards all the opportunities that you can gain from this mode. Now, I'm just repeating some things that I've already said about this for teachers. Prioritize communication, because this is what you do. You teach communication. Don't over worry about platforms. They will always be confusing, and they offer similar tools, all of them. But it's important, of course, to know about them. Do not over worry about the syllabus. Again, every teaching hour, we should have fewer things to do, teach less, in other words. Start with the learners and involve every single learner. Foster a positive attitude, extremely important, beginning with your own. If you have a negative attitude towards distance education, try to find ways that you can see the positive sides of distance education. Don't see it as a necessary evil. One trick in distance education is that it exposes yourself even more. And that's the funny thing. Through the monitor, we expose ourselves even more. Something we don't realize is that for the first time ever, what we do is now known to everybody. Not just our learners, but their families. Their families, their parents can also watch what we're doing. So we are, everybody knows the way we teach. We're exposed, in other words. So be yourself. Try not to be the teacher. And of course, integrate the offline mode, but don't overuse it. There's this method of the flipped classroom. We can talk about this at some other time. It's not good to lecture, spend the online meeting, as I do, talking for an hour and talking without engaging your learners. Engage them more. Remember that in every mode, face-to-face, online and offline, learner-centeredness and learning-centeredness has always been fundamental. And let me finish with this. I don't know if you know it, but about a year and a half ago, I started, for other reasons, for my own reasons, I started this YouTube channel on things dealing with English language teaching. And so there's many things to find there if you go to this link, or if you type everything English language teaching, which is the name of the channel. And I had the opportunity and the luck, when the problem began, the problem of the pandemic, to make a few videos about it. So you can go there, and there are colleagues from the university, school advisors, experts in distance education, with very interesting insights about all the things I've been talking about today. So that's it. Thank you so much. And I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sifakis, for your very interesting presentation. You successfully drew our attention to very important issues about distance education, and you triggered in this way a process of reflection for all of us. Well, a great benefit that the pandemic brought to the education community, I could say, is that by opening the discussion about issues like making good use of the curriculum, rethinking our assessing methods, well, I suppose maybe these same issues will be revisited when it comes to face-to-face teaching, don't you think? I think that there is a need for
Absolutely.
that. Okay, and
Absolutely.
we become, yeah. All right, thank you again. Well, we had, we had in mind that we will have some time for questions, but if you all agree and you react by showing me if you agree, using the reactions, I suggest that we should continue with the second presentation and leave some time at the end for questions. What do you think? Should we act this way? Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so we continue with our second speaker, Dr. Kosmas Vlachos. Dr. Vlachos is Associate Lecturer at the Department of English Language and Linguistics, Faculty of English Language and Literature, National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. He holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics and Educational Technology from the University of the Aegean, a master's degree in ETAL from the Hellenic Open University, and BA in English Language and Literature from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. His postdoctoral research in teaching English in blended learning environments was conducted in the department in which he currently teaches. Since 2007, he has been a tutor and supervisor of student dissertations in the course of a master's degree in the TESOL program of the Hellenic Open University. In addition to educational technology, his research interests include teaching second and foreign languages to young learners, intercultural education and pedagogy, differentiated instruction, English for specific purposes, and teacher education. His speech has the title Content and Language Integrated Learning, CLIL, From Theory to Implementation. For all my knowledge, Dr. Vlachos, CLIL has not been officially implemented in Greek schools yet, although all the more schools become multicultural and multilingual with the influence of migrants and refugees. Well, I know that in Europe, CLIL has been applied for more than 20 years now. Isn't that right?
That's right.
So we are looking forward, yeah. So we are looking forward to learning more about the CLIL method and its implementation. So we are ready to listen to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this invitation and the opportunity I'm having today. So, as you said, the title is Content and Language Integrated Learning CLIL, and we will be looking for onto how we can apply CLIL in different teaching situations. I suppose that some of you have some experience in CLIL, some others of you are novices. I will start with some information on the historical background to say that in 1984, the European Parliament, in cooperation with the educational councils, proposed implementation of a non-traditional teaching method, which would improve foreign language education. And a decade later, in 1994, David Marsh introduced CLIL for the first time, referring to content language integrated learning. CLIL has been featured in a series of declarations and has been invested with a major contribution to make to the Union's language learning goals. These goals aim at creating multilingual citizens, taking into consideration the extent of linguistic diversity of the European Union. But what is CLIL? Let's start with a definition. So according to COIL, content and language-integrated learning is a dual-focused educational approach, and I have to repeat, an educational approach and not a methodology, in which an additional language is used for the learning and teaching to both content and language. And here we see that according to this definition, or on the premises of this definition, we're talking about an additional language. And we do not have the distinction between the second or the foreign language, because we are not now in the context of immersion programs in Canada. We are talking about foreign language development, foreign language learning, and the term additional language is preferred. And I continue, I'm going on with the definition. CLIL said that is in the teaching and learning process. So we're talking about the teaching and learning process. We have a focus not only on content and not only on language. It is interwoven even if the emphasis is greater on one or the other at the given time. So we realize that we may have an emphasis on content, and some other times there can be an emphasis on language, depending on the syllabus, on the curriculum, on the needs of the specific learners, of what we have in mind when we create a program for our learners. It should be mentioned here that usually we have two forms of CLIL, the strong and the weak. The strong CLIL is something like, let's say, we integrate the content and the language in a program which runs throughout the school year or the academic year, and we focus on a specific subject. Sometimes CLIL can include many subjects. For example, in some institutes of education, we have, let's say, history, maths, and science taught in the additional language, which in our case is English. The Greek form is what usually happens in our context. I mean that we have certain classes teaching English, and at the same time using a topic-based work, focusing on a specific subject, and we teach one or two subjects, but there is a great emphasis on language. Some of the characteristics of CLIL. The dominant CLIL language in Europe, as you understand, is English. CLIL is commonly implemented once learners have already acquired literacy skills in their first language. From a content perspective, CLIL is education through construction rather than instruction, and this means that our learners are involved in problem-solving activities. They use their knowledge, the background knowledge. They are involved in tasks where they have to discover and explore the new information that is being processed in the specific lesson. From the language perspective, from the language view, CLIL uses languages to learn and learning to use languages. In other words, CLIL uses the English language to learn or to teach a content, a subject, and at the same time uses the subject to learn the language, to teach the language. In CLIL theory, in CLIL pedagogy, I would say, there are some basic principles. These are called the 4Cs framework, and they include content, communication, cognition, culture, and community. So we begin with content, and as you understand, The first, let's say, idea or the first principle is that we always need to remember that in CLIL we teach content. And through teaching content, our learners progress in knowledge. The second is, how do we teach content? We teach content through communication. So our learners use the language to learn the content, and at the same time, they learn the language. But content and communication are not enough. CLIL targets at cognition, at developing thinking skills. They learn how to analyze information, to synthesize new information, evaluate, create new products of learning. And last but not least, in the CLIL theory, we have culture and community. Our learners need to understand and accept the otherness. They are expected to develop global citizenship, and they also link the new knowledge to their own community. In CLIL lessons, we have two types of language learning. We make a distinction between language of learning and language for learning. And this will be important for us to know at this point, because later on, we will be seeing how to design CLIL lessons. So keep in mind that we make a distinction. I will begin with language of learning. This is the type of language that learners must acquire in order to be able to access the new knowledge that is going to be introduced through the specific content of the subject. It is language specific to the subject, so it can be related to the genre. For example, in a CLIL lesson of history, let's say, whose genre can be identified as period study. This language would include terms and vocabulary related to houses, clothes, customs, and other things. And when it comes to practice, the teacher who's going to teach the specific lesson on a period study, this teacher will have to introduce the new lexical items, teach the new lexical items that are relevant to houses, clothes, customs, etc. And this is the language of learning. But what is the language for learning? This is the language that our learners need to use during the lesson so that they can develop and do the tasks and activities efficiently. It is related to the classroom language. This type of language would include a vast number of examples, although the level of the foreign language of the group should always be taken into account in order that we can establish the difficulties learners may find to use some of the structures. For example, if the use of the past tense is part of the language learning in the lesson we talked about, the lesson on period study, then the teachers must also practice in asking and providing answers and posing questions in the past. So to have an effective lesson, on the one hand, our learners need to have been introduced to the specific vocabulary, the specific lexical items that is being taught for the topic. And on the other hand, they need to be offered opportunities for practicing the language for learning. So they will be given opportunities for practicing the simple past, questions and answers in the simple past. So after we keep in mind that we need two types of language in a CLIL lesson, the language of learning and the language of learning, we need to organize units of learning. And how can we organize units of learning? We can use a topic-based approach. Within a topic-based approach, students manage to learn the language through the content. When topics familiar to learners are used, they manage to learn the target language in a motivating way. And how can we deliver CLIL lessons in a more effective way, in a more motivating, but at the same time, a way that is applicable in our learning context? We can use the ICTs, we can use educational technology, and you will see in the examples, I will show you later on how the ICTs can be integrated in a very natural way. So when CLIL is implemented and is supported by information communication technologies, learning is stimulated and students are facilitated in their efforts to express themselves effectively in the target language, but at the same time acquire the new knowledge in the subject. Another question is, to what extent is CLIL implemented in the Greek educational context? So far, to my knowledge, CLIL has been introduced in the Greek educational context as an implementation of pilot projects. This means that there are several pilot projects running in the country, and teachers are using this new approach to teach both language and content. The type of CLIL we're having in Greece, at least to my knowledge, is the soft CLIL. So we have soft CLIL projects running in schools. And those of you teaching or having seen course books and educational materials that are being taught in private institutes of foreign languages, you may have seen that at the end of several units, there are CLIL lessons. We always need teaching principles. We need some principles so that we can design lessons. And now I will show you some very simple main principles that can constitute a teaching framework. So the first to be remembered is that the subject needs to be taught in simple, easily comprehensible ways using diagrams, illustrations, graphs, and highlighted terms. We need to remember that the subject we teach dictates what language support is needed. So the subject dictates the language of learning, the terms, the vocabulary, but also the language for learning. That is, what kind of language our learners will need to communicate, to collaborate, to fill in the activities we will offer. Another thing is that we always need to provide some input. So this input includes language subject-based vocabulary, and also we need to have texts or videos, and there should be discussions. There will have to be a discussion or more than one discussions in the classroom, and collaboration. Another thing is that the 4 skills, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, are a means of learning of the new information, of acquiring the new knowledge. So the 4 skills are the vehicle. The materials and communication need to be authentic. The materials need to be materials similar to what would be used in a subject class. And communication needs to include negotiation of meanings, problem-solving activities and negotiation of meanings. And in this sense, communication is authentic. Learning needs to be scaffolded, needs to be supported and structured. And how can it be scaffolded? It is scaffolded through notes you prepare for your students, mind maps, graphic organizers, and tasks carefully created, tasks that proceed from language to content, and then again from language to content. So there is a progress, as you understand. But because all this may sound quite theoretical, I will show you a very short video that presents a CLIL lesson. It will take you 2 or 3 minutes to see this video, and then I will recapitulate what you have seen.
Κύριε Βλάχο, δεν ξέρω αν έχει ήχο, γιατί δεν τον ακούμε.
I understand. I will try to find a solution for that. The thing is that I'm a novice in Zoom. I usually use WebEx, and I will see if I can share. I will stop sharing.
Kosma, turn the volume up, the laptop volume. Try to do that.
It is already turned up. It has to do with the sharing of the screen, I think. Let me check. I will make a selection. Let me take it from the beginning and see now what happens. Do I have sound now?
No, unfortunately.
No. Okay, the alternative is that I will give you the link to the video on the chat, and you can play the video. Okay, I will do that. Find the chat now, or stop sharing. Find the chat. So you all have the link to the video now, and I will give you 3 minutes to see the video, and then we return. I suppose that we have all finished with the video, and I will share my screen again. Well, all right. I have prepared the framework of activities, and we saw that the teacher introduced the topic through a video. And we saw that there was integration of the ICTs, and all activities were learner-centered, and there was a lot of collaboration in the classroom. So that was an active lesson, I would say. The role of the lesson was very active, and the teacher was the facilitator. She organizes the activity, she has prepared the materials, but the main action is taken by the students. She has also taught, she teaches the language of learning that there was that referred to the vocabulary, the lexical items, but she also taught the language for learning that was asking and answering questions in the simple present. So the teacher started by introducing the topic through a nice video, and then she went on to a vocabulary activity. So that was the language of learning, and that was a memory game learners played. And after that, there was the first content activity, what we use electricity for. Later, we had the second vocabulary activity that was classifying new vocabulary. And we had the second content activity that was reading, understanding, and comparing information. Later, we had the third content activity that was the problem solving activity. How much electricity do we consume at home? And we can see how learning was linked to community. So in this way, we accommodate the last C, that is culture and community. And last but not least, we had the fourth content activity that was game for assessing the knowledge acquired. All right. So let me take you to the next thing. Some ideas for planning CLIL lessons. So first of all, we begin by selecting the oral and written input we will use. Graphic organizers, as we said, plans, and we highlight key concepts because we are working with concepts in this content and language integrated learning. We consider what language is needed for the execution of the tasks. And we include more scaffolded strategies such as mind maps, let's say. We provide lots and lots of visual support for instructions and for the tasks. And we sequence the language skills during the lesson. We include a variety of tasks to develop different skills and learning strategies, because let's not forget that we are teaching both content and language, and we design activities which progress from comprehension to production. We diversify grouping patterns, and students change roles within the groups they are working. We exploit the ICTs, and we integrate a self-assessment check at the end of the lesson. In the example we saw, there was a game for assessment. in CLIL, we have different modes of assessment. We can have the traditional mode of assessment with quizzes, let's say, but what we try to do is that we use more self-assessment and peer assessment. And most of you would say that I'm having or I have classes with a very big number of learners. Interaction is not always feasible. And what happens with the very shy students? And how can I assign tasks that engage my learners in higher order thinking skills? Will they manage? How will they cope working with higher order thinking? Now, when you ask a higher order thinking question, or you outline a problem to solve, or you create a creative task, some of your learners will search for ways to avoid speaking in front of the whole class. If you see that you have the problem, you can use the think, pair, and share idea. So first, your learners may be given some silent thinking time so that they can rehearse the answer in their mind. After that, they can share their ideas with a friend, with a partner, with a pair. And they both find out ways to express themselves, and also they try to see if what they are saying makes some sense. After they have worked in pairs, they can share their answers with the rest of the class. So in CLIL, think, pair, and share is a very nice idea. And this takes me to assessment. It goes without saying that we are living in Greece, that at school we need to fill in forms, reports, I mean, with marks, that learners expect that there will be some testing because it is something that they have been used to. And you can have quizzes on content, you can have quizzes on language, but what we need to remember that is that in CLIL, we are expected, we are required to assess both content and language. It goes without saying that sometimes priority can be given to understanding of content, and some other times to accurate language use. But quizzes and testing is acceptable. A very good idea is using rubrics for assessing students. Using rubrics for their self-assessment or peer assessment, their self-evaluation. And assessment on a range of criteria can be more useful, or is more useful, than focusing on a single aspect of learning. So I have some examples of rubrics for language and identifying relevant information. The teacher selects what she or he will include in the criteria. In the specific rubrics, there are 4 criteria. The first is the use of topic-specific vocabulary in written work. So this is about language. So we have the rubrics with the scales, and we give 4 for excellent. All new words were used appropriately in simple sentences. We give 3 if 15 new words were used appropriately in simple sentences. We use 2 satisfactory if 10 words were used appropriately, and not satisfactory when fewer than 5 words were used. Now, another skill, a lifelong learning skill, is identifying relevant information from websites. This can be applicable to your teaching context or not applicable, but it can be a criterion. So we give a 4 when relevant information was identified from at least 3 different websites. We give 3 when relevant information was identified from at least 2 different websites, and go on so forth. Another criterion is ability to cooperate in a group task. So we give 4 when learners consistently perform well as a group member, showing initiative, organizing task completion, and supporting all other group members. We give something less when they often perform well as a group member. And another criterion in the rubrics can be originality in preparation and execution of diagrams and other visual materials. So the teacher chooses the criteria to be assessed. If high marks are given to critical thinking, learners can make sure that they are critical in their answers. So if they know the criteria beforehand, if they know that they will be evaluated by the teacher, or there will be self-evaluation or peer evaluation, they will pay attention to critical thinking. If teamwork is one of the criteria, learners will make the effort to interact. If a student is given a low grade in one category, she knows where to focus to become more successful. And in this way, you feed learner autonomy. Because even now, all this might seem quite theoretical, I will show you an example of a lesson that was designed by one of my students. She was teaching mythology, and the topic of her lesson was the 12 gods of Olympus. The target group was learners, 20 learners, let's say of about 8 to 9 years of age, and they were learners of a primary school, the 3rd grade. The duration of the lesson, of her lesson, was 60 minutes. So we have the can-do statements, the expected learning outcomes, in other words, and you can see on my screen that we have we make a distinction between learning outcomes for content and learning outcomes for language in a CLIL lesson. So the can-do statements for content is that my learners will be able to name the 12 Olympian gods, their symbols, and their roles in Greek mythology. And the can-do statements for language is that my learners will be able to describe a person referring to their personality and appearance, so description. And second, that my learners will be able to use simple structures, verb to be and have got in their descriptions. And that is the plan of activities. So we begin with a video once again. So because I do not have sound, I will play the video without sound. At the background, there is some music, but you will understand, you will have the main idea of the introductory video. So the teacher introduces the gods of Mount Olympus, and the students watch the video that introduces them to the topic. And here you can see the first worksheet. She says that, hello students, today we're going to learn about the 12 gods of Olympus, and she gives the link, and then there is some input for the learners, reading input. There are 12 gods. They live in a big palace on the mountain Olympus. That's why they are called Olympians. The gods drink nectar and eat ambrosia. And there was a big visual with the 12 gods. And then in the input, we have the gods. Zeus is the king of the gods. He's the god of the sky. He creates rain, and when he's angry, he creates thunder and lightning. And then we have Poseidon, Apollo, etc. Then we have the goddesses, and then a short text. And after the text, learners are invited to draw their favorite god or goddess. And after they finish with that, there is the second worksheet, and I will go to the second worksheet in a minute. So here the teacher, we are talking about a language activity. The teacher introduces new vocabulary. Learners describe the god or goddess they drew with the new vocabulary they learned. They exchange their drawing and description with the partner. They give and receive feedback. The teacher monitors learners working and offers her help if needed. So what kids do is that, what the teacher does is that she introduces the new vocabulary that is relevant to describing a person. So she teaches the vocabulary, and then she asks learners to describe the god or goddess they have drawn. Then they exchange the description and drawing with the partner. The partner helps correct mistakes they have made. And after they have worked in pairs, they present themselves in the class. The activity says that imagine that you are the god you drew. Present yourself in class. The description you wrote above is going to help you. So you realize here that we have scaffolded learning, that learners are taken by the hand and they progress from one step to another. So we have a very carefully designed lesson plan with activities that take learners from language to content, and then again from content to language. Back to the plan of activities. So after learners have presented themselves as the gods, we have a second content activity. The teacher presents the gods' symbols. The students practice the symbols on Quizlet in pairs using flashcards. So off to the next worksheet. The teacher uses a new worksheet with the symbols, the gods and their symbols, to remind you at this point that learners have already been introduced to the gods and the symbols beforehand, first with the video they had seen, which can be projected once or twice or more times if needed. And at this point, the teacher can show the video for one more time. So the teacher has some new input, which is in a worksheet. Learners read the worksheet with the teacher, or they read the worksheet in pairs. And after that, they are taken to Quizlet. So let me show you.
Κύριε Βλάχο, συγγνώμη λίγο για τη διακοπή. Απλώς είναι 2 παρά 4 περίπου. Να τελειώσουμε μέχρι τις 2 και 5, 2 και 10, για να έχουμε και λίγο χρόνο για ερωτήσεις, αν θέλετε.
Βεβαίως, σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. So the kids are taken to Quizlet, and in pairs, they ask and answer questions. They go like that. So they practice through Quizlet, and orally, they're having this interaction, and they learn the content. And then they're having another activity. They play gravity. So they have to remember hammer, for example. In a playful way, they try to remember. Oh, I forgot that. And it goes on and on like that. And then there is a backup activity where they have to match again. I mean, should the teacher have more time, she can assign the backup activity. So let's say they do something like that. And they complete the game. And for their assessment, we have a quiz. And except for the quiz, we have a table with a criteria and peer assessment. The criteria are knowledge of the 12 gods and their symbols, description of someone's personality and appearance, and ability to collaborate and work with a partner or in a team. And that was an example of a lesson that included the ICTs that used both content and languages activities that taught the language of learning and language for learning. There was a lot of interaction, presentation of the students, role playing, and in general, there was an attempt for high levels of motivation and engagement. So that was from my part. You can see my email address. I'm sure that some of you already know my email address, and they can contact me if they wish. And I'm available for more ideas from your part. I suppose that some of you might probably wish to share ideas on CLIL with us, and we can proceed with your questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Vlachos. Well, your presentation was very interesting. It was not just theoretical. Well, we appreciate you gave us examples. Thank you very much. So I would like to make a point, if I may. Well, in a Greek educational context, I think that there is a great need for teachers of other subject matters to learn more about the about the CLIL methodology, so they can teach, they can combine teaching the Greek language and the subject matter they teach to help students who are in their classes and they are children of refugees and migrants. Of course, it is very useful for English teachers, but at the same time, extremely useful for other subject teachers. And I think that the Ministry of Education and EEP should do something with the help, of course, of professors like you, will do something, okay, to support the students, the foreign students, and the teachers. Don't you agree?
Thank you for your comment. I agree. It goes without saying that subject teachers need to have a good command of the target language, which is English in our case. And to my knowledge, there are schools, for example, in Rallio Piramatiko Scholio in Piraeus, we have subject teachers collaborating and cooperating with language teachers because they teach CLIL. But there is a big challenge here. The challenge is that if you decide to have both teachers working on CLIL, which is the ideal scenario, there has to be a new curriculum. There has to be, if not a new curriculum, a new course, let's say. And to design the course, you must begin, you start with the learning aims. So you need, the language teacher needs to find the learning outcomes, the expected outcomes, and then the content teacher tries to find the expected content outcomes. Then you merge and you tailor a new course, which is quite demanding, but it can be very rewarding, because research has shown so far that when working with CLIL, not only kids are motivated, you save time, you save teaching and learning time. So there are challenges, we know, but it can be very rewarding.
Yeah, and I would add that sometimes even native students, Greek students, could benefit because, well, the CLIL method sometimes help all students understand better main concepts in different subject matters, which sometimes we take it for granted, but it's not that the case all the time, don't you think?
I do, yeah. I do.
Okay.
I hope that today you had some very basics, the basic information, the very basic idea has been conveyed, and teachers can start working and learning more on CLIL.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions, dear colleagues, that you would like to address to our speakers? Anna, would you...
There were some questions in the chat.
Ναι, υπήρχαν κάποιες
Να
ερωτήσεις.
στα ελληνικά, όπως είχαμε συμφωνήσει.
Ωραία, ας μιλάμε στα ελληνικά, ναι, κανένα πρόβλημα, βεβαίως.
Η συνάδελφος, η κυρία Νατσιούλη, θα ήθελε να ρωτήσει.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Θα ήθελα να συγχαρώ και τους δύο ομιλητές για τις υπέροχες ομιλίες σας. Ήταν πραγματικά πολύ ενδιαφέρουσες. Θα ήθελα να ρωτήσω τον κύριο Σιφάκη πώς θα μπορούσαμε να αντιμετωπίσουμε το πρόβλημα της απομόνωσης των μαθητών, των εκπαιδευόμενων, στο περιβάλλον της εξαποστάσεως εκπαίδευσης, που συχνά είναι ένα πρόβλημα που κάποιοι μπορεί να νιώθουν απομονωμένοι σε αυτό το ψηφιακό περιβάλλον.
Κύριε Νατσιούλη, πολύ σημαντικό το ερώτημά σας. Και να ξεκινήσω λέγοντας ότι δεν έχουμε τις απαντήσεις. Δεν είμαστε ειδικοί σε αυτό. Μπορούμε να κάνουμε μέσω δραστηριοτήτων να προσπαθήσουμε να τους εμπλέξουμε. Πάντως, αυτό που προσπάθησα να περάσω με τη δική μου την ομιλία είναι ότι αυτό που πρέπει να κάνουμε είναι ότι κάνουμε και στη διαζώση διδασκαλία. Και στη διαζώση διδασκαλία υπάρχουν φορές που κάποιοι μαθητές δεν εμπλέκονται. Συνήθως αυτοί οι μαθητές είναι ίσως οι πιο εσωστρεφείς, οι πιο χαμηλών τόνων σαν προσωπικότητες. Οι ίδιοι μαθητές στο online περιβάλλον θα είναι ακόμα πιο, ας πούμε, εξαφανισμένοι. Θα είναι αφανείς. Αλλά το ίδιο πράγμα συμβαίνει και στη διαζώσεις. Δεν είναι εντελώς διαφορετικό το online από το face-to-face. Απλώς το face-to-face βέβαια έχει την παρουσία, την κανονική, την φυσική παρουσία. Το θετικό στην διδασκαλία της γλώσσας είναι ότι διδάσκουμε, όπως είπαμε, επικοινωνία. Άρα, και αυτό είναι κάτι το οποίο είναι το δικό μας προτέρημα, δεν υπάρχει σε άλλα γνωστικά αντικείμενα. Ακόμα και στην διδασκαλία της μητρικής μας γλώσσας, που δεν διδάσκουμε βέβαια, δεν τη διδάσκουμε, την διδάσκουμε πάλι ως γνωστικό αντικείμενο. Αλλά στην ξένη γλώσσα, επειδή διδάσκουμε επικοινωνία και μέσα από την επικοινωνία ή μέσα από την έμφαση, ας πούμε, σε κάποιο άλλο γνωστικό αντικείμενο, όπως το CLIL, προσπαθούμε να εμπεδώσουμε τη μάθηση κάποιων δομών της γλώσσας. Αυτό είναι το απόλυτο προτέρημα, που σημαίνει ότι το σημαντικό είναι να διασφαλίσουμε ένα environment safe, ασφαλές για όλους, ώστε να μπορεί κανείς να θέλει να επικοινωνήσει. Αν θέλει να επικοινωνήσει κάποιος, αυτό είναι OK. Τώρα, τα βιβλία δεν βοηθάνε σε αυτό. Γιατί η δομή των βιβλίων είναι τέτοια που χαρακτηρίζονται από πυκνότητα πληροφορίας. Σε μια σελίδα είναι πολλά πράγματα. Πολλή πληροφορία πάνω στη σελίδα, κυρίως οπτική πληροφορία. Και πολλά tasks. Αλλά δεν είναι δυνατόν μία σελίδα να έχει 3 tasks ή έστω και 2 tasks. Για παράδειγμα, ο προφορικός λόγος, μια που μιλάμε για επικοινωνία και για παιδιά που πρέπει να εμπλέξουμε, για να βάλεις σωστά μια προφορική δραστηριότητα και να εμπλακούν οι μαθητές να θελήσουν να επικοινωνήσουν προφορικά, για οποιοδήποτε λόγο και σε οποιοδήποτε πεδίο και επίπεδο, είτε είναι προχωρημένοι, είτε είναι λίγο πιο beginners, πρέπει να δώσεις πάρα πολύ context. Πρέπει να δώσεις πολλά στοιχεία, να δώσεις υλικό, να το κάνεις ρεαλιστικό και αυθεντικό και τέτοιο, πέρα από το θέμα το οποίο πρέπει να ενδιαφέρει. Διαφορετικά δεν θα ασχοληθεί ο άλλος. Θα το δεις σαν μια υποχρέωση. Και αυτό είναι το άλλο κακό της τυπικής εκπαίδευσης, ότι είναι μια υποχρέωση. Σηκωνόμαστε το πρωί και πάμε σχολείο, αλλά δεν ξέρουμε γιατί πάμε σχολείο. Πιστεύουμε ότι θα δούμε τους φίλους μας, μιλάω για τα παιδιά. Είναι μια δουλειά κι αυτή. Πας εκεί, είσαι εκεί για 6 ώρες και κάνεις ό,τι σου λένε βασικά. Ή περιμένεις να σε επιπλήξουν. Ή περιμένεις να αποδείξεις κάτι. Όλα αυτά είναι στη λογική της ιδρυματοποίησης που όλοι μας έχουμε υποστεί από το σχολείο. Και βέβαια όλο αυτό δεν μας κάνει να αισθανόμαστε καλά. Ένα άλλο πράγμα που μπορούμε να κάνουμε για να εμπλέξουμε τους μαθητές όλους είναι να διαμορφώνουμε δραστηριότητες χωρίς να σκεφτόμαστε μόνο το cognitive load των δραστηριοτήτων. Δηλαδή, οι δάσκαλοι των Αγγλικών σκεφτόμαστε τώρα ότι αυτή η δραστηριότητα θα επικεντρώσει στα conditionals, ξέρω εγώ. Ή θα επικεντρώσει στη χρήση των άρθρων ή, ξέρω εγώ, στην παθητική φωνή. Αυτό είναι cognitive και αυτό ξέρουμε να το κάνουμε πολύ καλά, πάρα πολύ καλά και μπράβο μας. Αλλά αυτό είναι ένα κομμάτι της δουλειάς μας. Το άλλο κομμάτι είναι να κοιτάμε και να ξέρουμε ότι με κάθε δραστηριότητα που δίνουμε υπάρχει και ένα underlying, μια κρυφή, όπως λέμε, ατζέντα, η οποία είτε το θέλουμε είτε όχι υπάρχει. Δηλαδή, ποιοι θα εμπλακούν με ποιους άλλους και με ποιο τρόπο. Και αυτό πάλι είναι ένα θέμα που δεν το ακουμπάνε τα coursebooks. Όταν λένε τα coursebooks form groups ή form pairs, σταματάνε εκεί. Πρέπει ο δάσκαλος να σκεφτεί ποιο παιδάκι θα κάτσει με ποιο άλλο, ποια ομάδα θα διαμορφωθεί και με ποιο σκεπτικό, αν θα τους διαμορφώσω με βάση το επίπεδό τους ή με βάση τα ενδιαφέροντά τους, ή να βάλω σε μια ομάδα που οι υποομάδες που θα φτιάξω να μην έχουν πάνω από 4 ή 5 μέλη κάθε ομάδα, να έχει και έναν εσωστρεφή, άρα πρέπει να ξέρω ποιοι είναι εσωστρεφείς, γιατί ο εσωστρεφής θα μιλήσει περισσότερο ανοιχτά σε μια μικρότερη ομάδα από ότι σε όλη την τάξη, όπου θα ντραπεί να μιλήσει, για διάφορους λόγους. Αυτό δεν το ξέρουμε λοιπόν, ότι υπάρχει αυτή η κρυφή ατζέντα. Κάθε φορά που τους βάζουμε κάποιο activity, πρέπει να ξέρουμε ότι αν διατηρήσουμε την υπάρχουσα δομή της τάξης, δηλαδή όλα τα παιδιά δεν αλλάζουν θέσεις, κάθονται με το διπλανό τους και πάντα οι δυο τους κάνουν pairs, αυτό δεν κάνει τίποτα. Δεν βοηθάει τους μαθητές και την τάξη να ανακυκλωθεί η ομαδικότητα. Και μόνο με την ομαδικότητα και με την εμπέδωση της ομαδικής εργασίας, τα παιδιά που είναι λιγότερο εξωστρεφή θα έχουν τη δυνατότητα να ασχοληθούν περισσότερο. Αυτό είναι πολύ πιο δύσκολο να γίνει βέβαια στο online περιβάλλον. Αλλά και εκεί μπορεί να γίνει. Όλα αυτά βέβαια μας τα διδάσκει η εκπαιδευτική ψυχολογία και πρέπει να εντρυφήσουμε σε αυτή. Έχει πολλές απαντήσεις σε πολλά από τα ερωτήματά μας.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Μου επιτρέπετε ένα σχόλιο? Μπορώ να έχω ένα σχόλιο?
Βεβαίως.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Επειδή το θέμα αυτό της συμμετοχής των μαθητών το αντιμετωπίζουμε στο Πανεπιστήμιο, όταν είχαμε τα διαζώσεις μαθήματα, ξέρετε, μπαίναμε μέσα σε αμφιθέατρο να κάνουμε μάθημα και είχαμε την μπροστινή σειρά η οποία θα συμμετείχε στο μάθημα, ακόμα και δύο-τρία παιδιά από πίσω να συμμετείχαν, όμως οι περισσότεροι φοιτητές, ξέρετε, έμειναν μέσα στην ασφάλεια του παραμένω βουβός και παρακολουθώ όσο και αν τους άρεσε ή δεν τους άρεσε το μάθημα. Ψάχναμε λοιπόν τρόπους να βρούμε για να μπορέσουμε να τους δώσουμε κίνητρα συμμετοχής. Λοιπόν, το online περιβάλλον μας έδωσε τη δυνατότητα για όλα αυτά τα κίνητρα. Και εγώ προσωπικά αισθάνθηκα blessed όταν περάσαμε μέσα στην εξαποστάσεως. Γιατί? Καταρχήν, έχουμε στα χέρια μας αυτό το οποίο λέμε αξιολόγηση. Μιλήσαμε για την εναλλακτική αξιολόγηση, μιλήσαμε για διαφορετικούς τρόπους. Όταν λοιπόν μέσα στα κριτήρια εντάσσεις το participation και δίνεις κίνητρο του τύπου extra credits για το participation, αυτομάτως μπορείς να έχεις περισσότερους φοιτητές οι οποίοι συμμετέχουν. Νούμερο 1. Το δεύτερο είναι ότι έχουμε τα breakout rooms, τα γνωρίζετε. Δεν ξέρω πόσο εύκολο είναι να έχετε στο δημοτικό σχολείο breakout rooms, το καταλαβαίνω. Εξαρτάται όμως από τη βαθμίδα της εκπαίδευσης στην οποία βρίσκεστε. Έτσι λοιπόν, όταν τους βάζετε μέσα σε ένα breakout room να ετοιμάσουν κάτι και να σας το παρουσιάσουν, αυτομάτως έχετε αυξημένο επίπεδο participation, συμμετοχής, και εσείς μπορείτε να περάσετε από το ένα δωμάτιο στο άλλο. Το τρίτο που εγώ έκανα ήταν το εξής. Αξιοποίησα το blog της e-τάξης. Το blog της e-τάξης λοιπόν ήταν το δικό μου participation. Τους έδινα εκεί tasks, μικρά tasks, είτε να δουν κάποιο βίντεο, είτε να σχολιάσουν κάτι, και έμπαιναν μέσα λοιπόν σε αυτό ή στο forum, εάν έχετε forum στο περιβάλλον στο οποίο εργάζεστε, και με αυτόν τον τρόπο φοιτητές ή παιδιά τα οποία ποτέ δεν θα μιλούσαν, πήραν ρόλο, είδαν ότι μπορούν να ενεργοποιηθούν και να ακουστούν, γιατί τους δίνω τη δυνατότητα ο ένας να διαβάζει τα σχόλια του άλλου. Και τέλος, χρησιμοποίησα πάρα πολύ το Padlet, το οποίο στο Padlet θέτεις την ερώτηση, δίνουν όλη την απάντηση και μετά τους δίνει τη δυνατότητα να κάνουν ένα κλικ σε like ή dislike με καρδούλες ή οτιδήποτε, ή και να αφήσουν ένα comment. Όλα αυτά λοιπόν είναι ιδέες και δυνατότητες που έχουμε στην εξαποστάσεως εκπαίδευση, που μέχρι τώρα δεν τις είχαμε. Ευχαριστώ πολύ και συγγνώμη για την μακροσκελή παρέμβαση.
Ευχαριστούμε εμείς.
Ευχαριστούμε. Έχουμε άλλη ερώτηση?
Υπήρχε ακόμη μία ερώτηση από μία συναδέλφισσα, δεν θυμάμαι το όνομα, με συγχωρείτε. Ήταν για τον κύριο Σιφάκη και έλεγε «Elaborate on the use of cameras».
Ναι, το ρώτησε νομίζω ο κύριος Γιαννουλάτος.
Συνάδελφος τελικά.
Ναι. Τον χαιρετώ. Είναι από την Κρήτη. Εξαιρετικός δάσκαλος. Κοιτάξτε, η χρήση της κάμερας. Πρώτα, δεν έχουμε κλείσει το θέμα της εμπλοκής των παιδιών. Είναι ένα τεράστιο θέμα. Ο Κοσμάς έδωσε πολλές πρακτικές λύσεις. Το θέμα όμως δεν λύνεται τόσο απλά, πιστεύω. Εμείς βέβαια κάνουμε ό,τι μπορούμε, αλλά και πάλι δύσκολα εμπλέκονται πραγματικά οι μαθητές, όχι βέβαια οι φοιτητές, αλλά οι μαθητές μιας μικρότερης ηλικίας, με τη γλώσσα. Και όχι μόνο στη γλώσσα, αλλά και σε οποιοδήποτε γνωστικό αντικείμενο. Είναι ένα πολύ μεγάλο θέμα πάντως. Τώρα, ως προς τις κάμερες. Εδώ έχουμε τουλάχιστον δύο ζητήματα διαφορετικά. Το ένα ζήτημα είναι νομικό. Δεν μπορούμε να υποχρεώσουμε κανέναν να ανοίξει την κάμερα. Τελείως. Αυτό δηλαδή είναι σαφές. Το έχουμε συζητήσει και εμείς με τους συναδέλφους στο τμήμα, γιατί είναι ένα τεράστιο πρόβλημα. Κανείς δεν ανοίγει την κάμερά του, ο φοιτητής, και είναι το πολύ ενδιαφέρον παράδειγμα. Είναι φοβερή εμπειρία, πρέπει να τη βιώσετε. Να ξυπνάτε 9 το πρωί, 9 με 12, 3 ώρες μάθημα και να έχεις, ας πούμε, 60, 70, 100, 150, 250 φοιτητές, να διδάσκεις σε 250 συμμετέχοντες και να μην βλέπεις κανέναν ή να βλέπεις 1-2. Και να ξέρεις, γιατί εγώ έχω παιδί έχω δύο παιδιά 19 και 23 και είναι φοιτητές. Και ξέρω τι θα πει 9 το πρωί να ξυπνάει ένα παιδί. Ξυπνάει και γυρίζει από το άλλο πλευρό, έτσι. Και πατάει τη συμμετοχή στο Zoom και το αφήνει να παίζει. Δεν λέω ότι το κάνουν όλα τα παιδιά αυτό, έτσι. Όχι. Αλλά το ένα θέμα είναι αυτό, λοιπόν. Πώς ανοίγει η κάμερα. Η κάμερα δεν μπορούμε να υποχρεώσουμε κανέναν να την ανοίξει και καλύτερα να το καταλάβουμε αυτό. Επίσης, πρέπει να ανοίγουμε τη δική μας την κάμερα. Οπωσδήποτε. Αυτό είναι μια υποχρέωση τυπική και ουσιαστική. Εμείς έχουμε την υποχρέωση ως δάσκαλοι, όχι μόνο για να δούμε το καλό παράδειγμα, αλλά κυρίως για την ουσία του πράγματος. Ο δάσκαλος πρέπει να έχει πρόσωπο, πρέπει να φαίνεται, να εμφανίζεται και να είναι παρόν με την έννοια αυτή. Όταν έχεις μόνο τη φωνή σου και το μικρόφωνο, δεν υπάρχει παρουσία. Παρουσία υπάρχει μόνο και με την όψη. Οπότε το ερώτημα με τις κάμερες δεν είναι καθόλου εύκολο να απαντηθεί. Είναι ένα από τα προβλήματα της εξαποστάσεως εκπαίδευσης. Και στο ανοιχτό πανεπιστήμιο και στο συμβατικό πανεπιστήμιο υπάρχει μεγάλο θέμα με τις κάμερες και στα σχολεία. Δεν λύνεται εύκολα και δεν μπορείς να το λύσεις κιόλας. Είναι ένα από τα μεγάλα προβλήματα. Γιατί μπλέκει μέσα πάρα πολλά ζητήματα. Ένα άλλο πιο σημαντικό θέμα από αυτό, από τις κάμερες, κατά τη γνώμη μου, είναι η καταγραφή των μαθημάτων. Πρέπει να προσέχουμε τριπλά και τετραπλά και πολλαπλά όταν κάνουμε μάθημα online. Θυμάστε τις πρώτες ώρες που είχε γίνει το lockdown το Μάρτιο πέρυσι, είχε γίνει viral ένα βίντεο στο YouTube, ένα πανεπιστημιακό μάθημα, θυμάστε, με 2 καθηγητές, οι οποίοι ήταν μαζί και κάνανε το μάθημα και κάνουν διάλειμμα. Και λένε τώρα θα κάνουμε διάλειμμα. Είπανε θα κάνουν διάλειμμα, δεν κλείσαν την κάμερα και το μικρόφωνο και άρχισαν να μιλάνε μεταξύ τους και λέγανε τα απίστευτα για το μάθημα, τους φοιτητές, ο Τάδε και ο Δίνα κτλ. Και τους φωνάξαν αμέσως οι φοιτητές, μα τι κάνετε, τι είναι αυτά, ακούγεστε. Θέλει πάρα πολύ προσοχή. Καλά, το ξέρουμε τώρα όλοι αυτό ότι είναι ένα θέμα και προσέχουμε πάρα πολύ. Δεν ξέρεις όμως ποιος σε καταγράφει.
Ακριβώς.
Στην ιδανική περίπτωση δεν σε καταγράφει κανένας, γιατί απαγορεύεται. Απαγορεύεται η καταγραφή, όπως ξέρουμε, αλλά δεν μπορείς να το ελέγξεις αυτό και μπορεί κάποιος να καταγράψει τι κάνεις. Και όπως είπα και προηγουμένως, τα μαθήματα που κάνετε πλέον και όλοι μας online, είναι δημόσια μαθήματα. Δεν είναι μαθήματα μέσα στο σχολείο. Γιατί οι γονείς είναι δίπλα. Όποιος θέλει είναι δίπλα και έχει άμεση εικόνα του τι κάνεις μέσα στην τάξη. Και μπορεί να έρθει να σου πει μετά το α ή το β. Ή να σου το πει κάποια στιγμή. Ή να σε καταγράψει, ή να σου πει ότι δεν μιλάς αγγλικά συνέχεια. Γιατί δεν μιλάς αγγλικά? Να σου πει κάτι τη δουλειά σου δηλαδή. Ότι δεν κάνεις καλά τη δουλειά σου. Άρα δεν είναι οι κάμερες το θέμα, είναι μια σειρά από θέματα τα οποία δεν τα έχουμε συζητήσει, δεν τα έχουμε συμφωνήσει, όχι μόνο στην Ελλάδα, αλλά και διεθνώς. Και επειδή έχουμε πολλά κολλήματα στη χώρα μας και στην εκπαίδευση, όλα αυτά τα εντός εισαγωγικών κολλήματα διωγγώνονται και δεν υπάρχει χρόνος να γίνει ένας διάλογος. Αυτό είναι το μεγάλο πρόβλημα. Και δεν νομίζω να ποτέ θα υπάρξει χρόνος. Μας δόθηκε ευκαιρία, δεν το εκμεταλλευτήκαμε, γιατί είχαμε την πίεση, τη μεγάλη πίεση. Κολλήσαμε σε ζητήματα σημαντικά, αλλά για μένα επουσιώδη, αν τα βάλεις στην ιεραρχία, αν τα ιεραρχήσεις με βάση τη σημασία τους, όπως είναι, ας πούμε, οι κάμερες, τα μικρόφωνα, οι πλατφόρμες, όλα αυτά. Δεν μιλήσαμε για την ουσία του πράγματος, που είναι η εκπαίδευση. Και το ερώτημα που τέθηκε προηγουμένως, πώς εμπλέκεις τους μαθητές, πώς είσαι σίγουρος ότι οι μαθητές έχουν μάθει, που για μένα είναι ένα άλλο πολύ μεγάλο ερώτημα. Και τι έχουν μάθει και πώς οργανώνεις το μάθημά σου με στόχο ένα συγκεκριμένο learning outcome, το οποίο να είσαι σε θέση και να το αξιολογήσεις. Αυτά είναι ολίγης.
Ναι, και αν μου επιτρέπετε, και ο υψηλός στόχος του να τους κάνεις να θέλουν να είναι εκεί, να θέλουν να μαθαίνουν. Έτσι δεν είναι?
Οπωσδήποτε, οπωσδήποτε.
Οπωσδήποτε, όπως είπαμε και στην αρχή της συζήτησης, οι αλλαγές δεν γίνονται εύκολα, δεν έρχονται εύκολα και συνήθως, νομίζω θα συμφωνήσετε κι εσείς, έρχονται από κάτω προς τα πάνω. Όταν επιβάλλονται από πάνω προς τα κάτω, το αποτέλεσμα δεν είναι το αναμενόμενο, γιατί οι άνθρωποι από τη φύση τους αντιδρούν σε κάτι που τους επιβάλλεται. Οπότε αυτό έχουμε και εμείς στο μυαλό μας και λέμε να κάνουμε το σύλλογό μας ένα learning community και να συμβάλλουμε στο να έρθουν αυτές οι αλλαγές. Οπότε είμαστε εδώ, απευθύνουμε κάλεσμα προς όλους τους εκπαιδευτικούς που έχουν έτσι μεγάλο ζήλο και αγάπη για τη δουλειά τους, να ενωθούν μαζί μας από το καινούργιο σχολικό έτος και βασιζόμενοι και στη δική σας υποστήριξη κυρίως και τη συνεργασία, να κάνουμε the change to happen. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Ήταν πολύ εξαιρετική αυτή η παρουσία σας εδώ. Ευχόμαστε να είστε υγιείς. Αν μπορώ να κλείσω, δεν ξέρω, έχουμε κάτι άλλο?
Εγώ θα ήθελα να πω, για όσους ίσως δεν ήταν το chat, κυκλοφορεί ένα Google Form που μπορείτε να βάλετε το email σας και θα σας στείλουμε μία βεβαίωση συμμετοχής και όποιο υλικό τυχόν μοιραστούν οι ομιλητές μας μαζί μας. Και θα ήθελα να σας παρακαλέσω, όποιος θέλει, είναι εντελώς θελοντικό, ας ανοίξουμε την κάμερά μας έτσι στο τέλος για να πάρουμε και μία οικογενειακή φωτογραφία και να δείξουμε λίγο το πρόσωπό μας, να μην κλείσουμε έτσι σιωπηρά.
Εγώ ήθελα να σας ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ και να ευχαριστήσω πολύ και τον Νίκο, τον κύριο Σιφάκη, που μου έδωσε αυτή την ευκαιρία και με πρότεινε.
Εγώ σας ευχαριστώ.
Νίκο, σε ευχαριστώ, γιατί μου έδωσε τη χαρά να μπορέσω να μοιραστώ με όλους αυτούς τους πρώην συναδέλφους μου, γιατί πριν λίγα χρόνια ήμασταν συνάδελφοι στα σχολεία, αυτή την υπέροχη θαυμάσια εμπειρία. Ευχαριστώ, Νίκο, σας ευχαριστώ όλους.
Πάρα πολύ. Και ευχαριστούμε πολύ και την Αφροδίτη που ήταν ο συνδετικός μας κρίκος. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
Και όλους εσάς που είστε εδώ αυτή τη δύσκολη ώρα, έτσι λίγο πριν το μεσημεριανό. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Ήταν εξαιρετική ευκαιρία. Να σας πω ότι θα σταματήσω τώρα το recording